Right now on the National Weather Desk, flooding fury. A deluge causes a partial dam failure, collapses a bridge over a river, and leaves communities across the plains and Midwest underwater.
The worst flooding they've seen in years.
While a family avoids near catastrophe after flash flooding overruns a Utah canyon.
Here's what their campsite looked like at 5 p.m. And here's what it looked like just minutes later.
Find out why hurricane season is off to a slow start.
With a real main action coming our way in August.
A hurricane hunter talks about a bumpy flight into the eye of Hurricane Ian.
Did you guys get scared? Like, was that a situation where you were like, I'm fearful for my life?
And cherry cheers. Get ready for a very sweet season ahead.
From our nation's capital, this is the National Weather Desk.
Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the National Weather Desk. I'm Angela Brown. All eyes are on a dam in southern Minnesota this morning. Officials are warning the dam is in imminent failure condition. Days of pounding rain have pushed it to the limit. Debris started building up in the dam on Sunday, but yesterday the Blue Earth River cut around one side, carrying debris downstream. As of right now, officials say it is still intact, even though there was some sort of partial failure. The 114-year-old dam is county-owned and generates up to 6 million watts of hydroelectric power. Iowa continues to face historic flooding. This is what it looked like in the town of Cherokee yesterday. So much water filled the streets. People using kayaks. You can see it right here to get around. Homes and neighborhoods look more like islands with water surrounding them on all sides. The good news here is that the water is receding and there is no threat to the drinking supply. And now just to the west, a train bridge that connects Iowa to South Dakota collapsed into the Big Sioux River. A large portion of the steel bridge is partially submerged. You can see it here. Some trusses also collapsed. The railway stopped using the bridge over the weekend. As a precaution, trains are now being rerouted. No one was injured. The devastating flooding is also impacting rural communities as well. This is Turner County, South Dakota, but it's not a lake here, folks. You can see a truck right there, also completely covered in water. It's too early to know how much damage the flooding is actually causing for farmers and really everyone else living there. Cordell Wright has more.
We had a lot of corn that was maybe not quite knee high and stuff that was completely underwater. It could be a very big agricultural hit to the county. Marindal Lake, that's one of our big lakes here in Yankton County, that the spillway has never been that high before. It's wiped out a few of the county roads.
Now, attention turns to the James River.
And that continues to keep going up because we basically get it all before it hits the Missouri River in our county.
It's predicted that the river will crest early Wednesday morning at 1 a.m.
There's a trigger at like 16 feet that starts telling us that we have to start preparing, people along the river, or at least notifying that, we could see a flood.
In 2019, the river crested at over 27 feet. This time around, river gauge projections are showing a crest of around 25 feet.
People have been piling up bags all around their houses and stuff anywhere along the river that they possibly can to protect their properties.
And unfortunately, more rain could fall across the region later today. There's also a severe weather threat across a large area from Nebraska to western Ohio. Damaging winds, large hail, and a tornado or two are possible. Chicago, Indianapolis, Kansas City are all in that threat zone. And if severe weather isn't enough for people in the Midwest and in the plains, there's also the heat here. Many of them are among the 61 million Americans who are under heat alerts today. Some of the hottest areas will be in northern Florida, Arkansas, and Oklahoma. Temperatures will approach or even top 100 degrees in Oklahoma City, Tulsa, and Little Rock. The tropics have settled down compared to last week. The only disturbance being tracked has just a 20% chance of developing over the next 7 days and poses no risk to the U.S. So why are we not seeing mini storms develop? Meteorologist Alex Garcia explains.
The Atlantic really hasn't thrown us any curveballs lately. Things have been kind of quiet and have settled down a little bit after those initial little depressions that started to form in Alberto that came up and brought some rain into Mexico. There's a couple of things that are going on right now. First of all, we still have the westerlies that are blowing through the region, and that's kind of stopping things from happening. There's still plenty of energy in the water. I mean, the water is still pretty warm, so the heat energy is high. But take a look at what's coming out here from Africa. Boy, you can see it. This is a record amount of Saharan dust that's going to be moving right through the Atlantic development zone and right on up into the Gulf of Mexico. We're already seeing some of that moving into Texas and into Louisiana, so it's really going to get pretty thick here toward the end of the week. That's going to help kind of put a lid on what's going on out in the Atlantic, but there is a little system out there. We don't give it much of a chance of developing within the short term, but a long term, there's about a 20% chance it could develop in 7 days. But this little area, you know, it's going to be fighting westerly winds, going to be fighting the dust. I don't think it's really going to make it. So I'm thinking most of June should be quiet with a real main action coming our way in August.
Ooh. On Monday, Central California was hit with heavy rain, hail, and intense lightning, all while still dealing with 100-degree-plus temperatures. Myra Franco spoke to meteorologist Chris Kuiper and discovered the storms were caused by the lingering effects of Tropical Storm Alberto.
Heavy rain and thunder broke out during triple-digit heat throughout portions of the Central Valley Monday afternoon.
Oh my God, you hear that yet?
This was the reaction from many on social media.
Over 100 degrees with rain.
This is nice.
Lightning strikes were also captured on camera touching ground in Madeira. This video shows the moments a large bolt hits the ground. It set a tree on fire, but no injuries or structure damage was reported. The National Weather Service put out a special weather statement alert of winds up to 40 miles per hour and pea-sized hail in Madeira.
Baby, your stuff is getting wet.
It also caught a viewer in the middle of their summer plans as they cruised along in a boat at the lake.
We were just in the water.
Although all these photos shared by Fox 26 viewers of lightning bolts look pretty cool, they were the cause of multiple fires in Fresno County. So where did the storms come from?
The moisture from Tropical Storm Alberto just kind of zigged when it should have zagged, and it came up north into California and sparked these thunderstorms. So yeah, it's a little unusual and a little unexpected, but you know, summertime can mean thunderstorms, and we got some.
And now a dramatic story about a family that narrowly avoided serious injuries or really worse after flash flooding struck Utah. David Ochoa says the experienced boaters were surprised about the sheer amount of water, you can see a lot of it here, that ended up swallowing their campground.
All right, fam, are you guys ready?
At about 2:30 p.m. last Friday, the Olson family was enjoying a ride on the San Juan River. Woo! It was sunny with blue skies. The campsites they wanted were taken, so they had to go down a little further. Once they got to their spot a couple hours later, things changed.
The clouds were coming, and then we got hit with a rainstorm that was like hurricane level wind and rain. It was insane.
This video was taken at their campsite at 5 p.m. At the same time, just a few miles away, Olson's dad took this video. All that water flowing over Highway 163 was heading towards Olson.
And then the creek started to rise, and then it continued to rise.
They decided that if the creek continued to rise, they would just let their boats go.
If the boat goes, it goes.
And just minutes later, the water rose higher than they ever thought possible.
The water went from maybe 4 or 5 feet deep to 30 feet deep.
So they let the boats go.
We were on a rocky ledge, and the water was going around us, and then as soon as the water breached that ledge and started hitting us in the ankles, that was when we said, we're done. Let them go, get up high.
Here's what their campsite looked like at 5 p.m. And here's what it looked like just minutes later.
See, so those were the ledges we were on, and that's where the boats were down there.
Their boats and gear were gone, but no one was hurt, and they got out of the area with the help of search and rescue.
I've probably seen over 100, maybe 200 flash floods. And this one was like 10 times what I would have expected to come out of that side stream.
And now let's check to see the weather in cities across North America today. We'll start on the Gulf Coast in Biloxi, Mississippi, known for its seafood, beaches, and casinos. Biloxi will be mostly sunny today with a high of 93 degrees. Next up, Cleveland, Ohio. There's a chance of scattered thunderstorms today. Temperatures will top out in the low to mid 80s. Now let's head west to Eugene, Oregon, where it will be a magnificent day with sunny skies and a high of around 88 degrees. And finally, let's head north to the border for a look at Vancouver Harbor, Canada's third largest city. We'll see mostly cloudy skies and a high of 76 degrees. And coming up on the National Weather Desk, we'll talk with the hurricane hunter about what it's like flying into the eye of a hurricane, and we'll head to northern Michigan to check in on this year's cherry crop.
I'm meteorologist Charlie Lopresti with Look at the Northeast. It's a nice summer day on tap for today with afternoon highs warming back into the 80s to near 90 degrees. We'll have relatively low humidity as well. Look for a lot of sun. That's about 2 o'clock in the afternoon. Those showers moving into western New York. That's a warm front, and some of those showers will get into New England later tonight. That's 3 a.m. Wednesday. The sun comes back on Wednesday. Humidity builds. It's warm again with temps in the 80s to near 90. Some more showers move in Wednesday night into very early Thursday morning.
I'm Chief Meteorologist Gerard Jabali. Here's a look at the Mid-Atlantic region. We're nice and dry through your Tuesday, and even as we get to the beginnings of Wednesday, we are looking pretty good. Next chance of rain and thunderstorms arrives later on Wednesday with a cold front. Before then, we are going to see the humidity surge back and the temperatures also rising. Upper 80s to low 90s right around lunchtime. In the afternoon, we are going to hit likely the mid-90s, but upper 90s are likely for your Wednesday afternoon.
I'm meteorologist Charlotte Carl. We have a few isolated showers and thunderstorms continuing along the Atlantic coastline and also the Gulf coastline. This will continue into Tuesday morning, and then we'll see more sea breeze activity everywhere that typically has that dynamics going on, so along most of our coasts. A look at our lows overnight. We are going to have 70s for the most part. We have the 60s up in Asheville, and it's going to be another warm day ahead with high temperatures in the 90s.
You are watching the National Weather Desk.
Residents of Ruidoso, New Mexico were able to return home on Monday, a week after two massive wildfires broke out, burning over 25,000 acres of land. For many people, it was the first time, seeing all of this devastation caused by the South Fork and salt fires. Ariana Parra has more.
Exactly 1 week after the South Fork and salt fires started,
it was a crazy experience and very, very, dangerous.
Evacuations have been lifted.
People just want to get home.
But there are still some restrictions in place, meaning not everyone can go back home or what's left of home yet.
Want to get home and see if they have homes to go to, and they're not being allowed access.
And coming through the streets in the village of Ruidoso, many of them completely destroyed, like this one here. You can see this house completely burnt to the ground, some areas still smoldering, and the car completely melted that was left behind. Now, if you go ahead and take a look on my other side over here, you can see burnt down power lines where the fire ravaged through this area. All the trees completely burnt down and no longer green. For those people who hunkered down and waited the fires out despite the risk, they say it's still hard to believe this happened.
It almost looked unreal, it was like you're watching a movie. It was just unbelievable and it was scary.
While their homes are still intact,
luckily my home's fine.
Didn't burn anything down.
They feel for those who have a harsh reality waiting at home.
I can expect that it must be real sad, knowing that your whole life's work and all your house and everything is just burnt to the ground, and they're going to be seeing it for the first time now coming back into town.
New research finds both the frequency and intensity of extreme wildfires has more than doubled in the last 2 decades. Researchers looked at data collected by NASA satellites between January of 2003 and November of 2023. In the western U.S. and Canada, extreme fire events increased from 6 in 2003 to 67 in 2023. The reasons behind the extreme fires were not part of that study, however, but the lead author says the findings are consistent with the effects of climate change. While major flooding eluded the majority of the northeast Wisconsin in recent days, the relentless rounds of rain are having an impact on crops in that region. Andrew Mertens has more.
From sunflowers to corn and pumpkins, Polly's pumpkin patch in Chilton is gearing up for harvest time. However, the rainfall has been making it difficult.
Field corn comes up pretty fast because we had so much heat. Pumpkins did okay until it started raining.
Polly's pumpkin patch says standing puddles of water, like this one behind me here, typically will go down within a day or so. But with numerous rounds of rain over the weekend, that hasn't been possible.
That started on Friday and it was gone yesterday morning. And with the rains yesterday, it's back.
An overhead video of Polly Rowland and Gary Juckham's farm, you can see several areas of flooding, including in their corn maze, which features a 2025 NFL draft theme. The flooding is also alarming for their pumpkin patch. With standing water in the field, it can sometimes lead to the plants rotting, leaving the farm with a small window to plant new ones.
It's been hard because, like for pumpkins, some of them are 120-day crop. So if we replant now, they're not going to be ready by the time we need to pick them in the fall.
What we did replant already was about 100-day pumpkins, and those I believe will be ready by the end of September, beginning of October, as long as we don't get more and more and more rain, so these rot off as well.
The rainy weather has also taken away time for them to cultivate their land and pull out unwanted weeds.
This year, Michigan saw a very warm winter and an early start to the summer season. With peak cherry season right around the corner, meteorologist Trevor Robideau checks in on this year's crop.
Santucci Farm on Old Mission Peninsula is gearing up for another plentiful U-pick cherry season. Owner Mark Santucci said they're about 2 weeks ahead of schedule compared to normal, but a good crop is expected.
The cherry crop looks good this year. We were a little worried because we had the early warm-up and then a freeze after the blossoming, but the freeze wasn't severe enough to really affect the crop. So we're going to have a good crop in both the tart and the sweet cherries this year.
The warm winter and early summer have played their own significant roles in this year's crop, but some farmers may have not had enough water.
We haven't had enough rain, so if you don't have irrigation for your trees, they're going to get stressed. Even with irrigation, they're going to get stressed a little bit. So we still would like to have a little rain over the next couple of days.
Santucci, in the meantime, will focus his efforts on keeping the highest quality cherries for a reasonable price, saying he won't open until the cherries are perfect.
We're trying to give the consumers a good quality product and at a good price. And I would rather sell every cherry and make my money that way than leave half of them on the tree because I'm charging too much.
The life of a hurricane hunter is an adventure, a turbulent trip into the eye of major hurricanes, dropping instrument packs into the storm while dealing with extreme turbulence. These missions can bring. One flight a couple of years ago into Hurricane Ian was very bumpy, and it was all caught on camera by one of the engineers on board.
We flew out. It took us about 90 minutes to get out to where the storm was, and we started our first pass through. And at this time, it was rapidly intensifying, and Air Force C-130 had been out there a little bit earlier than us, and they had just passed through the northwestern eye wall and did not have a good time. And the way storms rotate, all of that nastiness was now coming down to the west side where we were going through. Normally, when you pass through an eye wall, it's a couple of minutes, you break out into the eye. All right, that was fun. Let's collect the data. We need to get back out the other side. We were in this eye wall for 10 minutes. And it wasn't just the up and down turbulence, but there was a lot of lateral, like rocks to the side, which are not as common and are certainly much more uncomfortable
do you guys get scared? Like, was that a situation where you were like, I'm fearful for my life? Or are you so used to it at this point that it was just kind of a wild ride?
So I'll say that the first time you fly through a hurricane, certainly you have more butterflies in your stomach, more fear, because you've never done it before. But you do this for a number of years, and then you also understand the amount of work and the amount of training and professionalism that goes into the crews on these aircraft, the pilots, the meteorologists, everybody on board is there to do a job, and they do it very well. And so you just have nothing but faith in the folks up front at the controls flying the aircraft that you're going to be okay. And you also have faith in the aircraft itself. I mean, these P-3s are almost 50 years old at this point, and they're still just trucking through hurricanes year after year. And so you don't think about that too much. That flight in particular, especially with like the lateral sways and the hits we were taking, it was a little more unsettling than normal. But I wouldn't say it's, scary.
Although this flight into end was nearly 2 years ago, it prompted research into Hurricane Hunter turbulence that was recently published. If you want to hear how the bumpiness on this flight compares to past missions, check out this week's episode of our podcast, Off the Radar. Find Off the Radar anywhere you listen to your podcast and hit follow to get alerted about future episodes. And time now for a short break, but first let's take in views of Seattle, Washington and the beautiful Puget Sound.
Well, a very good Tuesday morning, everyone. I'm meteorologist Andrew Buckmichael. Look at this. We got several locations nearing or into the triple digits today. Scattered strong storms kind of racing their way across the area from the northwest to the southeast as we go through the day. It continues to the southeast into the Ohio Valley for your Wednesday, but then it starts heating up back behind that rain, with more thunderstorms developing by the time that we get to Thursday out across the plains, while there's a lot of sunshine out across the Great Lakes in the Ohio Valley.
Good Tuesday morning to you. Meteorologist Chris Uche. Look at our forecast today across the region. The afternoon, it'll be hot, humid, 90s to around 100 degrees. Slight rain chance of the sea breeze along the Texas Gulf Coast and Louisiana. May get a shower storm up around Little Rock. We head into Wednesday's forecast. Maybe a couple of thunderstorms drift across. Otherwise, a lot of heat and humidity. We look ahead to the 6 to 10 day outlook. Below normal for most of the region on rainfall. And of course, temperatures right into 4th of July running above normal from the Climate Prediction Center.
Good morning. I'm meteorologist Rebecca Stevenson. Here's what's happening across the West. Excessive heat for parts of California, with triple-digit heat extending into southern Nevada, also into Arizona. This is brutal heat that's going to be causing some problems with advisories out and people being advised to keep it cool, find air conditioning. High pressure is tracking inland. We have a beautiful dry day ahead for Tuesday with warm temperatures in the Pacific Northwest, but showers and thunderstorms with potential flash flooding as we get into New Mexico this afternoon. That's the scene from here.
Watching the National Weather Desk.
Parts of Texas are expecting extreme temperatures reaching 100 degrees or even higher this week. Drew Powell looks at why staying hydrated is simply so important.
Whether it be working or playing in the water, whenever it's over 100 degrees, make sure you got plenty of water, bags of ice.
When your body is exposed to high temperatures, it produces sweat to cool down.
and sweating leads to a significant loss of water and electrolytes, which have to be replenished to prevent dehydration. To help prevent heat exhaustion and/or heat stroke, you need to drink water before and during your outing on the lake.
They'll bring their sodas or alcohol, and both sodas and alcohol are a diuretic. So while you're drinking something, it's not replenishing the fluids that your body needs.
Constant exposure to the sun will increase your body's heat, causing your body to sweat even if you're playing in or near the water.
A lot of times visitors forget that they're recreating on the water, so they don't think about staying hydrated. So whether you're out on the trails or recreating on the water, it's just really important that you stay hydrated.
And if you're looking for more weather content, check us out on social media. Just search the National Weather Desk. We'll be right back. Thank you so much for joining us. I'm Angela Brown. Make it a great Tuesday, and I'll see you right back here tomorrow.
The West back in the crosshairs.
Watching the TV, I see the fire. My wife said, hey, it looks like familiar right here. I don't expect it's in my backyard.
We got way lucky. We got lucky.
Firefighters bracing for a busy wildfire season.
Last year we tied our record number of calls. We're on pace to blow that out of the water this year.
Using every tool at their disposal to protect lives and homes.
This is really hard to look at.
And communities reduced to ashes in previous years, rebuilding with fire safety top of mind.
We don't want this place to go again. This needs to be a safe haven for people that want to be here.
Wildfire season, prepare and protect.
Hello, I'm Angelica Thornton.
And I'm meteorologist Rhonda Shelby. The people of Detroit, Oregon know the devastation wildfires can cause firsthand. In 20
A major shift in technology is helping first responders spot fires quicker.
Brian.
The West back in the crosshairs.
Watching the TV, I see the fire. My wife said, hey, it looks like familiar right here. I don't know, it's Peggy's in my backyard.
We got way lucky. Like, we got lucky.
Firefighters bracing for a busy wildfire season.
Last year we tied our record number of calls. We're on pace to blow that out of the water this year.
Using every tool at their disposal to protect lives and homes.
This is really hard to look at.
And communities reduced to ashes in previous years, rebuilding with fire safety top of mind.
We don't want this place to go again. This needs to be a safe haven for people that want to be here.
Wildfire season, prepare and protect.
Hello, I'm Angelica Thornton.
And I'm meteorologist Rhonda Shelby. Every year, thousands of wildfires break out across the United States.
The West is finally free from drought after 3 of the driest years on record, but trees are still dying, creating fuel for potential fires. When it comes to forest health, the Forest Service says it looks for 3 colors: gray, green, and red. And in the last 3 years, they say there has been too much red. That's the color of a tree that died in the last year. Another culprit of forest health, fire suppression. 100 years of preventing fires has now left too many trees fighting for too little water, and thirsty and fatigued trees are being eaten alive.
You get these little pitch masses on the exterior showing that a beetle has attempted to attack and lay eggs in that tree.
70, 80, 90% of the trees have been killed by the beetles here.
Ryan Davey with the U.S. Forest Service says dead or dying trees need to be removed from around communities before they turn into fuel. According to the National Interagency Fire Center, last year more than 55,000 fires burned over 2.6 million acres. The West back in the crosshairs.
Watching the TV, I see the fire. My wife said, hey, it looks like familiar right here. I don't know, it's Peggy's in my backyard.
In Ohio. The derailment occurred shortly after a hot bearing detector broadcast a critical alarm about a wheel bearing's temperature. 38 rail cars derailed, 11 of which were transporting hazardous material. 3 of these hazardous materials tank cars sustained mechanical breaches during the derailment and released flammable or combustible materials. 5 others released flammable gases as a result of fire exposure and deliberate breaching with explosives to perform a vent and burn procedure. On behalf of the entire agency, I want to recognize the significant impact that this derailment has had on the community in East Palestine, Ohio, in Darlington, Pennsylvania, and all the surrounding areas throughout the state of Ohio, throughout the state of Pennsylvania. Unfortunately, some have sought to minimize the wide-ranging impacts of this derailment, pointing to the fact that there were no fatalities or injuries. For this, we are certainly grateful, but the absence of a fatality or injury doesn't mean the presence of safety. The absence of a fatality or injury doesn't mean the presence of safety. The NTSB exists to ensure the presence of safety, to shine light on the vulnerabilities that compromise safety. We don't wait for a death or injury to occur. We bring safety issues to the forefront and make recommendations that, if implemented, would prevent the next train derailment or fire. To the community at large, on behalf of the NTSB, I'm so sorry that this happened. We are so sorry that this happened here. Our hearts are with you. Today may be difficult for many of you. So volunteer mental health clinicians from the American Red Cross and Salvation Army are available throughout today's proceedings. Please see staff at the back. We have Elias Contanis and we have Stephanie Matonic from our Transportation Disaster Assistance Division in the back wearing NTSB logo gear. They will connect you with the appropriate representatives, and thank you to the Salvation Army and the American Red Cross for their support. I also want to thank Chris Neifer, Superintendent of East Palestine City Schools, and the entire staff of East Palestine High School for hosting us once again for this final board meeting and for all their work and kind words and actions welcoming us to East Palestine during the investigative hearing last June. I want to thank the East Palestine Police Department, East Palestine Fire and EMS, the Columbiana County Sheriff's Office, Ohio State Highway Patrol, in particular the Lisbon Post, and Federal Protective Services Region 5, Chicago, for working with us closely since day one of this investigation through our hearing in June and now this board meeting. I also want to thank the numerous police officers, firefighters, dispatchers, hazmat teams, EMTs, and others who responded to this derailment. 48 entities were involved in the response, including the East Palestine Police Department, the East Palestine Fire Department, and fire departments from neighboring communities and throughout the state, including East Liverpool and Beaver County. Thank you so much for all you do and every day to ensure safety. Our investigative process entailed extensive development of the facts and circumstances surrounding the accident. We conducted fact-finding with the input of our parties and conducted a public hearing. Following the hearing, we developed a transcript and added it and all statements to the public docket, which is available on our website at ntsb.gov. Thus, the fact-finding portion of our investigation was complete months ago. That aspect of the investigation culminated with an offer to our parties to make party submissions in which they could provide proposed findings to be drawn from the facts that we developed, otherwise called the evidence produced during the course of the investigation, a proposed probable cause, and our proposed safety recommendations designed to prevent future accidents. We have utilized the intervening time to conduct analysis, independent analysis of the evidence, a part of our independent investigation that is within the sole purview of the NTSB. Now, each board member has studied the draft report and met individually with the investigative team, but this is the first time that the board has gathered together to discuss the report. In a moment, the investigative team will walk us through the event, present the pertinent facts and analysis and findings, and summarize the findings in detail. After their presentations, board members will question staff on the key safety issues uncovered during the investigation. Staff will then propose the relevant findings, probable cause, and safety recommendations for board consideration. Following the incorporation of any amendments voted on today, the final report will be available on our website in a few weeks. This allows time for staff to make final edits. However, an abstract will be available today. There are two public dockets for the investigation. One was released prior to the hearing in June 2023 and includes the complete hearing transcripts. The second docket was released on January 25, 2024 this year. Again, they're available at ntsb.gov. Before we hear from the investigative team, I'd like to invite Member Graham, who again was the board member on scene during this investigation, to make a statement. Member Graham, you're recognized for as much time as you may consume.
Thank you, Chair, and good morning, Chair Hamady, board members Chapman, Brown, and Inman, investigative staff, and those joining us in person and live online. As we convene today to conclude our investigation into the train derailment in East Palestine, I want to begin by acknowledging the profound impact this incident has had on the community. To the people of East Palestine and the surrounding communities, we extend our deepest sympathies. We recognize the fear, disruption, and hardship you have endured. This board is committed to ensuring that your voices are heard and that your experiences help guide our pursuit of safety improvements on our nation's railways. I arrived with the NTSB investigative team on Saturday, February 4th. On Sunday, our command post was moved to the Unity Fire Station. When the team arrived, we were greeted by a volunteer firefighter who couldn't have been more than 18 to 19 years old. We started talking and quickly learned this young man was among the many firefighters who responded in minutes following the derailment. He told us about his experiences that night, receiving the call, quickly responding with his friends and fellow volunteer firefighters to protect their community, and the dangers they faced on the scene. Later, the firefighter's mother surprised us by bringing the NTSB investigative team a crock pot full of homemade sloppy joes, chips, and water for lunch. I'll never forget that. To me, the story of that mother and the son symbolizes the spirit, the resilience, and the character of East Palestine and the surrounding communities. In the wake of the immense tragedy, the community came together. Your strength and unity in the face of adversity has deeply moved us. Today, we present our findings mindful of the challenges faced by those affected. We are here to ensure that the lessons learned from this derailment will lead to meaningful change so no other community has to relive the challenges faced by the people of East Palestine. I also want to extend my deepest gratitude to our investigative team. Your dedication and meticulous work have been exemplary. Your efforts not only help us understand what went wrong, but pave the way for vital safety recommendations that, if implemented, will prevent similar accidents in the future and enhance the safety of our nation's railways. To the community of East Palestine, please know that your safety and well-being are at the forefront of our mission. Our work will not end with the issuance of the safety recommendations today, but rather we will continue to pursue and advocate for these safety recommendations until each one is implemented. Thank you, Chair, for this opportunity to make an opening statement, and I look forward to the meeting today.
Thank you so much. Well said. Excellent statement. Before turning it over to the investigative team, we held a community meeting last night to discuss our investigative process. I see many are back today. Thank you so much for coming in and meeting with us last night. I invite everyone back tonight for another community meeting at 6 right here in this room to answer questions you may have regarding the proceedings today, regarding all our evidence, regarding findings. We can get into as much detail as you want, and we will be here in this room for as long as it takes to answer all your questions and make sure you're heard. I'll now ask Deputy Managing Director for Investigations, Brian Curtis, to introduce members of the NTSB team participating in today's meeting. Good morning, Mr. Curtis.
Good morning, and thank you, Chair Homendy. A few announcements before we begin. I kindly request the folks here in the auditorium, if you have not already done so, please silence your mobile phones and other electronic devices. In the event of an emergency, the NTSB will call 911. We also have medics on site who are trained to provide CPR and use an AED. The NTSB will radio the medics for assistance if needed. Should we need to evacuate, there are 3 points for exit, one on either side of the stage and at the back of the auditorium where you entered. In the event of an emergency, please walk quickly to the nearest exit, don't run, and make your way outside. Once you have exited the building, please follow the sidewalk to the parking lot across the street from the school. Please follow the instructions of local police. Do not delay and do not return to the auditorium until instructed to do so. I will now introduce staff for today's meeting. In the first row, to my right, Michael Hiller, Deputy Director, Office of Railroad Pipeline and Hazardous Materials Investigations. Ruben Payan, Investigator in Charge. Paul Stansel, Hazardous Materials. Troy Lloyd, Initial Emergency Response and Track. Joey Ryan, Mechanical. Greg Scott, Signals, Train Control, and Wayside Defect Detectors. and Dr. Stephen Jenner, Human Factors. And behind me in the second row, left to right, Jen Adler, Director for the Office of Safety Recommendations and Communications, Tom McMurray, General Counsel for the NTSB, Michael Badinsky, Deputy Director for the Office of Research and Engineering, Carol Waldrop, Safety Recommendations, Andrew Dykestill, Technical Writer-Editor, Adrian Lamb, Materials Laboratory, Michael Portman, Vehicle Recorder Laboratory, and Zach Zagata, Operations. The presentations will begin with an investigation overview by the investigator in charge, Ruben Payan. Mr. Payan.
Good morning, Chair Hamidi and members of the board. This morning I will start with an overview of the accident investigation, followed by presentations from the group chairs in their specific investigative areas. On February 3rd, 2023, about 8:54 p.m., eastbound Norfolk Southern freight train 32N derailed in East Palestine, Ohio. The train consisted of 3 locomotives and 149 mixed freight rail cars, which included 20 placarded hazardous material tank cars. 17 of those tank cars were loaded and 3 were residue tank cars. The derailment involved 38 freight rail cars. Among the 38 derailed cars were 11 tank cars carrying flammable and combustible hazardous materials. 5 of these were DOT 105 specification tank cars and were carrying vinyl chloride monomer. The accident also involved 12 additional rail cars that did not derail but were damaged by the post-derailment fires. Emergency responders established a 1-mile evacuation zone that affected about 2,000 residents. Train 32N originated at the Terminal Railroad Association of St. Louis Yard in Madison, Illinois on February 1st, 2023. The train departed eastbound with a Norfolk Southern train crew and was destined for Conway Yard in Pennsylvania. On February 2nd, the train arrived in the Norfolk Southern Yard in Decatur, Illinois, where 55 rail cars were removed from the consist and an additional 40 rail cars were added to the rear of the train. One of the locomotives at the head of the train was also repositioned towards the middle of the train. Upon departure from Decatur later that same day, the train consists of 3 locomotives and 149 rail cars remained unchanged throughout the train's subsequent movements. The train arrived in Toledo, Ohio on February 3rd, where the accident crew, an engineer, a conductor, and a conductor trainee went on duty. The accident crew conducted a briefing with the previous train crew and tested the train's brakes before departing. The train departed Toledo, Ohio, beginning the last leg of its trip before the derailment. After the accident, investigators obtained surveillance footage from private homes and local businesses that captured train's 32N's movements covering a distance of more than 50 miles. In Salem, Ohio, about 26 miles from the point of derailment, surveillance footage recorded the train with the glow of a fire visible underneath the 23rd hopper car. As the train continued into Columbiana, Ohio, surveillance footage recorded the hopper car with a fire underneath the lead axle. This was about 10 miles from the point of derailment. About 4 miles from the point of derailment, surveillance footage recorded the train in New Waterford, Ohio, with fire and sparks underneath the same hopper car. Finally, in East Palestine, surveillance footage recorded the train showing a visible fire underneath the hopper car. As train 32N approached the point of derailment, the train encountered 3 wayside hot bearing defect detectors. Train 32N fully traversed the 2 defect detector locations at Sebring and Salem and began to traverse the East Palestine defect detector location when a critical alarm was received over the lead locomotive radio. The critical alarm reported axle 101 on the south rail, which corresponded to the left side bearing on the first axle of the 23rd rail car, the GPLX 75465 hopper car. Locomotive event recorder data indicated the train was traveling about 43 miles per hour at that time. After receiving the critical alarm, the train crew began to stop the train. According to the locomotive event recorder data, The engineer began to slow the train using dynamic braking before 8:54 p.m. Shortly afterward, as the train was still passing over the East Palestine hot bearing detector location, the train experienced a train line initiated emergency braking application. The head locomotives traveled about 1,670 feet before coming to a stop 38 seconds later. The crew radioed the Norfolk Southern Dispatch Center that it had experienced an emergency. The Norfolk Southern dispatcher confirmed the emergency at 8:56 p.m. and began coordinating train movements in the area to prevent other trains from colliding with train 32N. The NTSB investigation established that the following factors did not contribute to the accident. The track's condition and geometry near the derailment site did not show any defects that could have caused or contributed to derailment. The traffic control signal system and the positive train control system were functioning as designed at the time of the derailment. The crew of train 32N acted in accordance with Norfolk Southern operating rules, responding appropriately to both the bearing alarm and the derailment itself. The vinyl chloride monomer was loaded in a manner sufficient to stabilize the vinyl chloride monomer for transport and was shipped under the correct proper shipping name, UN 1086 vinyl chloride stabilized. The derailed hazardous material tank cars were not overloaded by weight or volume, and none of the 6 derailed DOT 105 tank cars sustained mechanical breaches during the derailment, including the 5 carrying vinyl chloride monomer, and none released lading except through the pressure relief device activity or the vent and burn operation. The investigation identified several safety issues in this accident: wheel bearing failures and detection, initial emergency response, hazardous material and tank car derailment performance, and the vent and burn operation. This is a list of the NTSB investigative staff that worked on the East Palestine, Ohio train derailment investigation. Additional NTSB investigative staff that also contributed to the East Palestine, Ohio train derailment are listed here. Parties to the NTSB investigation included the Federal Railroad Administration, the Pipeline Hazardous Materials Safety Administration, the Ohio State Highway Patrol, the Village of East Palestine, the Norfolk Southern Corporation, Trinity Industries Leasing Company, International Association of Sheet Metal, Air, Rail, and Transportation Workers. Parties to the investigation also included the International Association of Firefighters, Oxyvinyls LP, GATX Corporation, Midland Manufacturing, the Brotherhood of Locomotive Engineers and Trainmen, and the Transportation Communications Union, or Brotherhood of Railroad Carmen. In this accident, investigators were able to use head-in and inward-facing image recorder data that detailed the crew's activities and actions in the moments leading up to and during the derailment. Norfolk Southern, like most Class I railroads, have voluntarily installed these devices, but image and audio recorders are not required by FRA regulations for freight locomotives. For this investigation, Norfolk Southern only provided 20 minutes of data. The audio and video data that was provided demonstrated and confirmed that the train crew were alert and responded appropriately to the hot bearing alarm. Additionally, the data were instrumental in corroborating train crew statements. Previously issued recommendations regarding locomotive audio and image recorders were prompted by railroad accident investigations in which NTSB determined having inward and outward facing audio and image recorders would have provided crucial information that could have improved safety. Therefore, staff has proposed reiterating one recommendation to the Secretary of Transportation, 2 recommendations to the FRA, and 1 recommendation to the Class I railroads to install crash and fire protected inward and outward facing audio and image recorders with a minimum 12-hour continuous recording capability. This concludes my opening presentation. Next, Mr. Ryan and Mr. Scott will be presenting on wheel bearing failures and detection, followed by Mr. Lloyd, who will discuss the initial emergency response, and then Mr. Stansel will present on hazardous materials and tank car derailment performance issues and the vent and burn issues. Mr. Ryan.
Good morning. This presentation will cover the bearing failure and wayside detection systems. This is a cross-section depiction of a typical railroad freight car wheel and bearing. As you can see, typical components in this bearing include rollers, cages to align the rollers, and oil seal to retain the grease and protect it from environmental conditions. This bearing is pressed onto the end of the axle known as the journal. The weight of the car is supported by 8 bearings, 4 on each side of the car. Upon arrival, investigators found the number 1 axle with the left number 1 journal burnt off from the hopper car GPLX 75465 that was carrying plastic pellets. This car was the 23rd car from the front of the train of a total of 149 car consist. A healthy or undamaged journal is cylindrical in shape. High temperatures and a defective bearing typically twist the journal into a conical shape and then falls off, allowing the car to drop to the ground and in this case to derail. A teardown of the opposing bearing on the same axle was inconclusive, meaning no defective conditions were found that would indicate a possible bearing failure. The bearing had set in the fire and perishable evidence was destroyed, including the grease seals, the outer cage, and the grease. In Madison, Illinois, the train was mechanically inspected by qualified mechanical inspectors, also known as carmen, as required by federal regulations. In Decatur, Illinois, the added 40 cars were also inspected by qualified mechanical inspectors as required. The train then proceeded to East Palestine, Ohio, where the incident took place. Post-accident inspections revealed that about 25% of the cars had federal defective conditions. The train was headed in an easterly direction with the number 1 axle leading. I am providing this slide as a visual indicator of the location of the left number 1 wheel and a photograph of the actual hopper car involved and a graphic below. The NTSB investigated 2 other incidents that occurred on Norfolk Southern Railway after the East Palestine derailment that also had burnt off journals. One in Newcastle, Pennsylvania, where a train traversed a hot bearing detector with a hot bearing, but the alert was not sent due to being miswired from earlier maintenance and a journal burnt off and the train ultimately derailed. And in Elliston, Virginia, where a train crew received a hot bearing alarm after traversing a hot bearing detector, stopped and verified that the bearing was overheated and proceeded forward, bypassing the first set-out location at track speed where the bearing continued to overheat and ultimately burned off the journal and derailed. The mentioned cars with defective bearings from East Palestine, Newcastle, and Elliston had 3 similar findings. They were all axle position number 1, they were all bulk hopper service type cars, and all 3 also had reconditioned bearings. Currently, there is no national database to research historical trends. What we found was there are no standards pertaining to operational responses to bearing alerts and alarms. A bearing database capturing bearing failure and replacement information could help identify bearing failure risk factors. We are proposing one recommendation to the Federal Railroad Administration to establish rules governing railroads' operational responses to bearing failure warnings. We are proposing one recommendation to the Association of American Railroads to develop a database of bearing failures and replacements to help determine failure risk factors. Now, Greg Scott will cover wayside detection systems.
Thank you, Joey. Above is a basic view of a typical hot bearing detector location to show the different parts. On the top right, you have a signal bungalow where the internal electronic equipment is housed and all the external equipment is connected. The signal bungalow also contains an external temperature sensor that helps determine the external ambient temperature. On the bottom right, you have 2 transducers that are both mounted on the same rail. These are magnetic sensors used for counting axles and determining the direction of the train. These were the items in the Newcastle derailment that Mr. Ryan spoke of earlier that were wired incorrectly. On your top left, you will see a dragging equipment detector. These paddles are on a pivotable axle and are designed to sense anything that may be dragging from the train. Bottom left is an item of focus in this investigation. These are wheel bearing scanners that are located on both rails and designed to monitor bearing temperatures. The map you see is the last 3 hot bearing detectors the accident train 32N traversed. It passed the Sebring detector with no alerts or alarms. It then traveled approximately 10 miles and crossed the Salem hot bearing detector and sent an alert to the back office personnel due to the bearing being 103 degrees above ambient. The 32N then traveled approximately 20 miles to the East Palestine detector that alarmed on the 101st axle L1 bearing at 253 degrees above Fahrenheit, which is the maximum temperature that this equipment is able to detect. The train crew began to take appropriate action by slowing the train when it derailed before the train could come to a complete stop. After the East Palestine accident, the Association of American Railroads stated on March 8th, 2023, in a key safety measures memo that all Class 1s had committed to an average spacing of 15 miles. As you can see here in this map, the detector spacing involved in this derailment already met the newly recommended average of 15-mile spacing. Pictured on the left is the 32N passing a surveillance camera with fire visible prior to reaching the Salem hot bearing detector. When the 32N passed through the Salem detector in this location, it only showed 103 degrees Fahrenheit above ambient air temperature, which was recorded at 11 degrees. We know fire burns hotter than 103 degrees above ambient, so in theory, the hot bearing detector should have shown a critical alarm. Instead, the detector sent a non-critical alert to the back office analyst. We believe the fire that was visible was the grease that had began to burn on the outside portion of the bearing and was not detected as a hotter temperature due to the scanner aimed at the inner portion of the bearing as shown in the figure on the right. During critical alarms, when a train is occupying a detector and a defect has been detected, an automatic radio transmission is sent to the train crew. A typical message will begin with an announcement of a critical alarm and repeat 3 times. It will then follow with a detector milepost location, followed by the words hot box, meaning excessively hot journal. The message will then indicate the exact axle of the alarm location and on which rail. A typical critical alarm message will sound like the following recording.
Critical alarm. Norfolk Southern milepost 91.9. Hot box axle 671 east rail.
After the train receives this message, it must immediately stop for an inspection consistent with safe train handling procedures. The Federal Railroad Administration has no regulations regarding critical alarms. The Association of American Railroads does have recommendations for an overheated bearing, which states a bearing is deemed overheated when it reaches 170 degrees Fahrenheit when identified by a hot bearing detector. Prior to the accident on February 3rd, Class 1 railroads temperatures for critical alarms ranged from 136 degrees Fahrenheit to 190 degrees Fahrenheit. After the accident on February 3rd, the Class 1 railroads temperatures ranged from 136 degrees Fahrenheit to 180 degrees Fahrenheit. To these limits, the Association of American Railroads have established as an overheated bearing reflect a safe operating temperature. We believe these temperature thresholds need to be researched and identify a proper, safe operating temperature. Alerts and alarms such as the one from the Salem hot bearing detector, are sent to a back office analyst called an advanced train control analyst. The analyst monitors all alerts and alarms and follows standard operating procedures on when to take action. This analyst also communicates with train crews to help them determine the exact location on their train of any alert or alarm. Pictured above is a screen an analyst would see displayed. It is color-coded to help him quickly distinguish the severity of alerts and alarms, with red being the most severe. When the analyst chooses a particular hot bearing alert, this is the screen he may see displayed. This screen is of the alert the analyst saw of the non-critical alert from the Salem hot bearing detector. The top portion is comparing the bearing in question to the bearings in the train itself, the 32N. The bottom portion is the trending of that bearing from the other detectors the train has passed previously. Shown is axle 101, bearing L1 with a temperature of 103 degrees Fahrenheit. Per Norfolk Southern operating procedures, the analyst would simply monitor the first non-critical alert. Action is not required until 3 consecutive alerts are received that are above their threshold standards. Then the train is to be inspected when safe to do so, and delay can be minimized. Analysts would contact the crew via radio and instruct the crew of the situation and advise them to contact the dispatcher for a location to perform the inspections. Currently, the FRA has no regulations regarding temperature trending and alert limits. The Association of American Railroads does have recommendations for temperature trending and when a bearing is deemed overheated. Most Class 1s each have different protocols regarding temperature trending. Once again, do these limits need to be set at the Association of American Railroads definition of an overheated bearing or at a safe operating temperature? What we found in this investigation was first that the Salem hot bearing detector did not reflect the true temperature of the bearing. Second, that the internal bearing temperature likely exceeds external measured bearing temperatures. Third, the standard operating procedure limited the ability of the hot bearing detectors to measure a bearing's actual internal temperatures. And fourth, that the research is necessary to determine alarm and alert thresholds, distances between detectors, and review newer, more advanced technologies. And finally, that wayside bearing detectors should be subject to regulatory requirements for installation, inspection, and maintenance. We were proposing 3 recommendations to the Federal Railroad Administration. First, to research the effectiveness of current detection systems and identify minimum standards and make this research available to the public. Second, use the results from this research to establish minimum requirements for the use of the bearing defect detection systems. And third, establish requirements for installation, inspection, and maintenance of wayside bearing defect detectors. Now Troy Lloyd will cover the initial emergency response.
Thank you, Craig. Good morning, Chair and members of the board. This presentation will discuss the following: the early emergency response timeline, including initial firefighting activities, State of Ohio firefighter training standards, the availability of train consist information, and tank car placard legibility and durability. The East Palestine Police and Fire Dispatch Center received the first 911 call at 8:56 p.m., reporting that a train had derailed with explosion and fire. The dispatch center radioed the East Palestine Fire Department at 8:58 p.m., requesting all available fire and emergency medical services units to respond. The fire department and the police department arrived on scene about 9 p.m. The East Palestine Police Department were first to arrive on scene and started evacuating homes near the burning tank cars. They also established control zones entering the incident site. The deputy fire chief arrived on scene a few minutes later. After assessing the incident scene, the deputy fire chief assumed the role of incident commander and established a command post at the Lake Oil property site adjacent to the derailment pileup and burning rail cars. The early emergency response at East Palestine focused on containing the fire and protecting residents near the derailment site.